The Old College Try, the podcast here at the end of April. Thanks for joining us. As we do at the end of every month, we got your Q&A grab bag today. So ton of great questions. Please keep them coming, whether it's through social channels, YouTube, however you want to share those questions with us. We're here to answer them. And that's exactly what Peggy and I do today. Thanks for joining us. Okay, Peggy. Wow, let's see. It'll be May 1st, the day this... No, it'll be May 30, the day this...
The day before.
It is almost D-Day here. We are right at the finish line. I'm not sure if you just saw, but we were quoted in the New York Times with Ron Lieber just talking about that. Yes, some of these schools, he was picking on Northeastern in particular, are just, I don't know if they're intentionally playing games, but, parents that are appealing and have legitimate reasons for appealing may not hear about it before May 1st. So it's his thing is he just thinks that should basically be illegal. You're basically not fulfilling your obligation to hear appeals because that's, as we know, after May 1st, it's just makes it so much harder.
Oh yeah, you got to make a decision without really knowing what something costs.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So Ron's out there fighting the good fight. We appreciate him very much for that. And and again, it's, yes, Northeastern was on the receiving end of this one, but they're not the only institution that have kind of similar practices, whether they're intentional or not, right? Doesn't necessarily matter for these families that have to make this huge decision.
Yeah, we've seen this in previous years too.
Yep, 100%. So that's kind of the latest and greatest, right? And again, it's just good that more, again, Ron does a good job holding these colleges accountable. And I think just this general awareness is just good for parents, good for us, because it's again, all helping people pay less for college and making sure that they're, the colleges don't have as much of the upper hand at least. Okay, let's dive in. We got to, as we do at the end of every month, we're just answering your questions. We got a ton of great questions as we typically do. Please, we encourage you to send those always through our socials, put them on YouTube. Our team is always keeping an eye out for those. So happy to address some of these here. Now, this one, Peggy, I think we can probably both talk to.
So wait, you forgot about the song. We got to do the song.
Oh my God. Sorry, Peggy.
That's the most colossal mistake you've made this year.
Inexcusable, and it's your turn.
I'm ready to roll. I'm going. I was watching a movie like a week ago and I thought, yeah, all these other singers and the groups that I love that we haven't even tapped. So if people, I think people have probably heard of this guy. He was a long time ago, Sam Cooke. But I love Sam Cooke. So, one of his most famous songs, but it's a good one, You Send Me. You just listen to Sam Cooke and it's just like all is right with the world. And you just get that, at least I do, that kind of feeling. So go check him out. He's on Spotify, but that's my song.
Awesome. Thank you for correcting my mistake there. And I know this is kind of in the works. Now, we always put these songs kind of in the show notes and link them in YouTube when we can, but I know our team, Eileen and I, are going to kind of compile, thanks to Michael Korich on our team, had the idea, I think, or maybe, I don't know. Anyways,
he slapped me the other day and I was like, great idea. Yeah.
Eileen was on it already, but anyways, is going to kind of compile a evolving playlist, right? So all these songs that Peggy or myself or guests, right? When we have our guests on, we like to get their tunes. We're going to have kind of a working playlist to share as well here, so you guys get it.
So then when you have your next party, you're just ready to roll. All our listeners will be ready to roll.
It's teed up for you, 100%.
Okay, so sorry, interrupting.
Let's dig into the questions here, and I think this first one might apply to a decent amount of people. We hear it all the time this time of year and over the next couple of weeks and months, and that is, if my 529 doesn't cover the entire 4 years, what's the best way to split that up, right? Just to put some numbers to it, my kid's college is going to cost $40,000 a year. And I have $50,000 in a 529 total. So if we're looking at this nut of $160,000, I've got $50,000 of it saved. What's best kind of practice for how to chop that up? So kick it to you first, Peggy, and then I can either I can weigh in, agree, disagree, whatever. But let's hear your take.
Yeah, because there's a bunch of pieces here, so it's tempting to say, sweet, I got enough to pay for freshman year. Phoop, just take it all out. So there's several reasons to strategize around this. You really want to look at this 40,000 cost over the 4 year. It might get less, it might get more in some of those years if you've got multiple kids in school. There's a lot of moving pieces. We won't even go to that part. We're going to assume it's 40,000 a year. To Matt's point, for ease of numbers, it's 160,000. So first piece, and this is bringing in another question that we have, but I'll mesh it in here. There's a tax credit called the American Opportunity Tax Credit. It's $2,500 a year. That means if you owe 20,000, now you owe 17,500. Comes right off what you owe the government, and it's per child. You have to be lower than 160,000 in income as married filing jointly, and then it phases out at 180, and then you're not eligible. So, but if you are eligible, you need to spend $4,000 out of cash flow, not out of a tax advantaged account. And at 529, you get tax-free earnings. You never pay tax on the earnings if you pull it out for the qualified education expenses. So that's one reason you don't want to just take the full 40 out, because if you're eligible for the American Opportunity Tax Credit, you've now lost that opportunity, because you've got to have the 4,000 of tuition and fees and or books that you just pay out of pocket, basically. So that's one reason. The other reason why you want to look at this over 4 years, and Matt and I talk about this all the time, you and I do, Matt, that the federal direct student loans are use it or lose it, and your child can get these just by submitting the FAFSA. So if you spend it all and then you look back and go, oh, that loan they offered me at that decent interest rate, I want to go grab it. You can't. That's why you really need to plan it out. Many people are in the scenario that you said, Matt. Like most people, if you're lucky enough to be able to save at all, most people can't get into six-figure balances, right? So the upshot is you've got a plan. It's not just everybody should do this answer, but those are some pieces to think about for sure.
Yeah, and to your point, you just said it there, right? There isn't like a one size fits all recommendation. Everybody should front load it. Everybody should split it evenly among 4 years, right? But a couple other thoughts that I'll just add there, right? I would say, and you said this, but it can get so confusing, I think, that it's helpful for people to hear more than once. But I think what the biggest mistake that I don't see a world in which we would recommend to anybody, especially if the household income is below 160,000, is that they just, and again, it's an easy mistake to make. Like, I understand why people do this. They say, hey, I got the first year covered. I don't need my kid to borrow. I don't need to borrow. I have 50,000 in my account. The bill's 40,000. Boom. And there we go. Again, we just lost out on the federal direct student loan. We just lost out on a $2,500 tax credit by not using $4,000 from savings, from cash flow, from whatever, right? So at a minimum, take out the federal direct student loan. Okay, make sure that we come up with $4,000 from another resource that's not the 529. So kind of in that example, again, round numbers, we would be coming up with about 30,000 from the 529, and the 10,000 is we're going to come up with a federal direct student loan, and then $4,000 from somewhere else. So that would be kind of a close to a universal recommendation that at a kind of minimum, if you want to get aggressive in front loading this, at least do that, right? That's kind of the most important thing. Now, after that, it becomes a little bit more complex, right? Now, we have to understand as parents, any loan that we take out, as soon as we start borrowing, the meter's going to be running on the interest, right? And so that's where, a lot of times it makes sense to front load it so we can just kind of delay when we have to borrow. However, I could almost say in the same breath, there might be exceptions. There's this loan called Pickett and Hatcher. That's 2%. While the kids are in college, fixed, right? 2%. So that's close to free money. So you could make an argument, and I can only borrow 15,000 through this option, but you can make an argument to be like, well, I don't know. Maybe I tap into this 15,000 and, borrowing at 2%, I can live with that. Maybe my 529 money does better than that. Maybe not, of course, right? There's an element of risk and unknown. But then maybe I'm not eligible for Pickett and Hatcher. I go to apply to that loan. I'm not eligible. I don't have great credit. So I don't get a competitive rate in the private sector either. And then the Federal Plus loan is somewhere around 9%. Now, so again, that would be a scenario where I'd say, okay, we're probably better off in front loading. So the points I'm sharing is that, again, there's not just a crystal clear, everybody should do this, right? In their
Yeah. Lots of moving pieces. You basically got the PhD version there for math. So
All
yeah,
right. So
there's a lot of lot of moving pieces, and it's like you said, not one size fits all. But just takeaway too is don't just spend all your 529 because you might be sorry you did that junior year. You got to plan. You got to plan it out. Which one do I want to give you? This is an easy one. I'll give you an easy one, then I'll give you a hard one. So how do I take out student loans? How does my child take them out? Like all at once? I've even had people ask, do you take it out at the beginning of the 4 years or is it the beginning of the year? Can you take it out mid-year? How does that work with student loans?
yeah, so generally speaking, you're borrowing for the year, right? And you can't borrow more than that, right? You couldn't say, hey, I want to borrow for all 4 years. That's not an option. So you're borrowing for that year. And for most colleges, again, there's exceptions, but most colleges work in semesters. So we're going to get billed in the summer for the fall semester, right? And we're going to get billed in late fall, early winter for the spring semester, right? Right in and around the holidays and New Year. But if we know we're going to need to borrow $30,000 for the year, for example, we will borrow or apply to borrow for all that $30,000 if and when we're approved. The money kind of changes hands behind the scenes, so to speak, right? Where as soon as it's approved, the college knows that money is coming from the federal government or coming from Sallie Mae or a state program, wherever you happen to borrow from. And the lender will automatically disperse half of that for the fall semester and then the second half in the spring semester. You're not doing much in terms of, admin, right? They don't write a check to you or give you a direct deposit. Pickett and Hatcher is the only exception I can think of that does that. But just about all lenders, aside from that, again, the money's going to go from that institution to the colleges. They're going to chop it up appropriately. Now, you could borrow for one semester, right? Like, let's just say, for example, like, hey, I have the first semester covered, but I'm going to need to borrow for the second semester. You can do that. So that's certainly an option. And obviously it makes sense for some people. And then for those schools that do have trimesters, things like this, again, the lender does the admin work for making sure that it's chopped up appropriately for each trimester.
I can jump in and answer. We get this question a lot about 529s. If you're lucky enough, you saved a bunch and your child gets a nice scholarship, a full ride scholarship, or just a chunk, what can I do with these 529 funds? Well, you can definitely change the beneficiary. So if you have younger kids, that's perfect. Even if you have a child that's in college and you can't fully fund them, you can change it to them. They don't have to be like a high school or younger child. The IRS very clearly defines who you can change to. So it's not just your kids. You could go back to school as a parent and use it. And I don't remember if it's cousins. I can't
I
remember.
believe it is. Yeah, I believe it's nieces and nephews as well.
Yeah. But it
Yep.
is defined, so it can't just be, oh, my sister-in-law, my brother divorced, there's rules, right? So that's one thing. So if you have other people that would need it, that's perfect. You can take it out if you've got the scholarship. You are going to pay tax on the earnings, so they're not going to penalize you. But if you pull it out, you will have to pay tax on the earnings. So that is another thing. We're not going to get in the weeds, but there's also a provision that the government came out with not too long ago where 529s can be rolled into Roths. But there are a bunch can't just be the whole balance right away. There's different rules, and we won't get into the nitty-gritty on that. But that's another option for some people, and they'll just start a Roth for that beneficiary, and the funds can be moved per the IRS regulations, basically.
And then sorry if you had said this, Becky, but then if there's no younger kids, if there's no cousins, if there's nobody that kind of makes and we've we maybe maxed out our Roth opportunities or things like that, isn't kind of the and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the kind of quote unquote worst case scenarios that hey, you take the money and say, okay, we didn't need it for college, so we're going to use it on whatever, right? And then at that point we just pay a penalty, a tax hit. That's kind of again, you get the money, you just don't get to take advantage of essentially all the tax benefits that are set up there like they're intended
Right.
for college, right? So it's your money.
Right.
You just
Yeah.
don't own the same dollar amount. right?
Yeah, and as the owner, which is usually the parent, grandparent, it's the adult, it's your money. It's not your child's money where you basically have to hold it for them and give it to them, which is another account that people were asking about, but it's your money. So yeah, exactly right. You take it out, you're going to pay tax on the earnings because that was the perk, and you're going to pay a 10% penalty on that because you didn't use it for qualified education expenses. But
Yep.
yeah, it's a good point. It's not like it's lost your money.
Yep.
You just pay those the
I'm trying to stump me, Peggy.
All right. So now we're going to switch gears and just talk about the CSS profile, the form that, about 250 mostly private schools require. And they have, and I guess you explain what this is just in case people who didn't submit the question don't even know. But
Sure.
how do you get approved within the CSS profile world for a non-custodial waiver? So explain what that is and then, give us the lowdown on that.
Sure. So you said it right. About 250 colleges require this financial aid application called the CSS Profile in addition to the FAFSA. And the vast majority of these, if you're a two household family, so if you're divorced or separated, there's, parents are not together, not living together, most of these are going to require the financial aid or require the financial information via the CSS profile from each of the households, right? Now, that's not always easy, right? Maybe one of the parents we don't know where they are. Maybe there's a parent that just refuses to cooperate and says, I'm not completing this financial aid application. So obviously, there's a ton of different dynamics here, but some households look at this and say, I'm powerless to get my ex to be able to complete their CSS profile, but these colleges are telling me I need to be eligible for financial aid. For these scenarios, there's something called a non-custodial waiver, right? Which is essentially, it's an unpleasant process because you really do need to air your dirty laundry. They really ask you, well, tell us why this can't happen. And they usually want a signature from the student, from the parent, and then oftentimes a third party, a school counselor or clergy member, right? Something like this. And they kind of give you a list of that they would generally accept as being a viable third party option. They're going to ask you to be, very specific, and then you send it to each of the colleges that are requesting this information or requiring this information, and then they'll sit as a committee and basically say yay or nay, right? If you have any of these, really bad, really challenging situations, they're going to approve you for the non-custodial waiver, and they're going to say, forget it. We won't require that parent's information. We're just going to give you your financial aid package based on the one household that is completing the CSS profile, right? But there's a matter of subjectivity. The colleges have choices, and even sometimes we are really disappointed where we think this is a brutal situation. They say, like, sorry, we haven't seen enough, and we are going to require that parent's information. If they're not going to provide it, we're not giving you any institutional dollars. So there is a process for it, and certainly you can feel just, I think, confident that if you have one of these really hard situations, the colleges are going to work with you.
I think the main thing, and I just had a family with this the other day, they want to know if the student, the child has contact with this parent. And if they're texting every day, but they haven't seen each other for 5 years, or if that parent is part of their life in some capacity, even if it's minor, that usually they're going to say no. But if, that's the first thing I always ask. Well, are you in communication with your mom? Are you in communication with your dad? But to your point, it's worth the try depending on your situation because different schools are going to, potentially look at it differently.
And another trigger we've seen where even if it has been, say, a pretty gnarly situation, a situation where from what I could tell, I'd be like, okay, I think these guys are worthy of a non-custodial waiver. If that ex pays child support, some of these schools have that's a hard rule. If they pay child support, we consider that to be involved enough that we're going to require their information. That's where we've seen some really disappointing results where everything else about this scenario was completely nasty and there's no communication, but they pay child support. So sorry. So anyways, and again, these things are there's a huge gray area here. So, and nothing's guaranteed. You got to go through the process with each school individually.
Yep. Yeah. But it's well worth the time because it could mean tons of money for aid and literally they'll only give you federal if you submit
Right.
the FAFSA. They just won't give you any of their money. So that's a big loss for many, many families.
Okay, Peggy. So for this question, a pretty specific one. So you'll probably say, well, I can't give a firm answer here, but maybe you can talk us through just how people should be thinking about this. And the question is it better to drain a 529 account before a UTMA account with capital gains? So again, if I have a custodial account that's going to have capital gains, is it better to drain the 529 first?
Yeah, so this I was alluding to this before when we were talking about 529. So a UTMA is the opposite of a 529. So the parent or the adult is the custodian, but it is the money of whoever the beneficiary is, the student, right? A lot of grandparents, this was the only game in town to save for minors way back when. So that's a big difference with financial aid. So the key thing to understand with the UTMAs and the UGMA accounts, this person is referencing capital gains, super common that grandma bought a bunch of Microsoft, gave it to the child, and now it's lovely. There's tons of gains, there's a big growth, but that's a taxable event to the student. So this is where strategy and timing and starting your process early with a high school kid is super important, because I've had a few of these through the years and it's been awesome, where I know them freshman, beginning of sophomore year in high school. Because if you are going to liquidate, and I'm not saying you should, that might be your strategy. That's how you're going to pay for school. Great. You want to do that if there's massive gains before January 1 of the child's sophomore year in high school, because that, believe it or not, that's the base year. That's the first year when your child's a senior that the financial aid board is going to be asking about. It's weird, but it's called prior years. All of these things require planning. So that's high level. That's a big difference. So you have to look at that UTMA account, and you have a 529, and you, like we were talking about at the beginning, that 4-year cash flow. How are you going to use things? And if you do have one of those accounts with your child being the beneficiary and they're younger, get some guidance. We're happy to help you to talk through it one-on-one, because you might, if you're going to do liquidating, you might want to make a move during their sophomore year in high school. Completely depends on if you're eligible for need-based aid. So there's a lot of different moving pieces.
Yep, 100%. Okay, so I'll pick off an easy one here. How much can you withdraw from your 529? Whatever the total cost of attendance is, minus any financial aid that you've been given or you've accepted, right? So, again, if you're paying full rack rate at some of these schools that are $100,000 and you didn't get a financial aid, you can take out $100,000. And I guess the only so hopefully that's pretty clear. I guess what is sometimes less obvious, but if you have a student that lives off campus, for example, you can use $529 for off-campus housing. So sometimes what will happen, or the use case for that, and this is usually it's more common, I should say, for upperclassmen, right? Where they might say, okay, I got to borrow, $30,000 for the semester. 20,000 of that goes to the college for tuition and fees, etc. But then I need $10,000 for the my kids' rent and off-campus expenses, kind of related to that. And you can use it for that. That is an expense that they will allow you to use it for. I think the big one, Peggy, is the big one that you would think would be related to college costs, but I guess there's not, or there's travel expenses like plane tickets, etc. You can't use with the 529. But just about anything else that you would think of that would be related to these college costs, again, including off-campus housing, is fair game.
Yeah. And, again, the IRS defines it, not, string lights that your daughter wants for her dorm room. Like, that's not a qualified and you are spending it for college. But the travel, that's what I was going to add. That's the big one, because it seems logical. Well, I'm getting on a plane, my child's getting on, but the IRS, that's not part of the bucket. So that's the piece you have to be careful and realize that Vanguard, Fidelity, who's ever doing your 529, it's not on them to monitor this. You ask for money, they'll give you whatever you ask for in a distribution. You got to keep track of this by tax year, because if you get audited, you got to show the government. Otherwise, you're going to get dinged with penalties. So you got to be careful with that.
It's a good point. They don't manage that for you, 100%. They're going to say, "Tell us where you want to send the money. Tell us how much," and it's on you to make sure that you're kosher from a tax standpoint, not buying a boat with that money, etc. All right, Peggy. I
Yep.
think last-ish one here. I don't know if this one, I don't know that I'd be able to provide a ton of value, but you can take a stab at it. The difference between specifically the Florida prepaid plan, the Florida 529 plan, and a private 529 like Vanguard, Fidelity, etc. Any opinions on which one is quote unquote better?
Well, again, it depends on the family and their situation. Like a prepaid plan, and I'm not intimately familiar with Florida's, but when I used to live in Washington, we had the guaranteed education tuition plan, same thing. The concept there is you have a kindergartner and you buy units at the current in-state tuition price. And then as it grows, which, I had this for my kids, and then I also had a 529. It was great. The rate of return was University of Washington one year said, we're raising tuition 15%. Boom, I just made 15% with no market risk. So I'm assuming the Florida plan is similar. That's what a prepaid plan is. It's an IRS vehicle. So again, falls under all the same things we're talking about with 529s about qualified education expenses. That's all similar. Just the growth opportunity is different. And a lot of states got rid of prepaid plans when the market crashed in 07, 08. Won't go into the reasons, but it just they had issues staying afloat, and they were investing in the market, and then it tanked, and there were just issues came up. So that's the prepaid plan. If you have the Florida 529 plan, each state or almost every state, I think, has a 529. You don't have to be in that state's plan. That's more what we're talking about today. You're in the market and then you pull the money when you want to. So that's that plan. The private 529 plan is kind of a cross section. You've got certain colleges and universities that are in the private plan, and you can Google it and go to their site and look that up. But again, it's more of you're buying units to go to that school, MIT, whatever it is. And so it's a slightly different type of plan. So it really depends on your child and what's going on. I mean, there's just so many moving pieces, but high level, those are the descriptions of what this person asked about in their question. But this would require one-on-one advice
100,
and sitting down and
100%.
understanding all.
And I would say in terms of like which one is better, right? It's kind of basically impossible to say, right? And I think your kind of standard 529 plans, whether it's a state, whether it's Vanguard, whether it's Fidelity, you're going to have similar options in terms of, what's your risk tolerance type of deal, what's your time horizon, right? They're going to be structured in comparable
Yeah.
ways and probably not a ton of variation in terms of underlying funds and things like this. But yeah, that's a conversation to that we need to unpack one-on-one, because our recommendation is going to vary from one family and next, as it does with so many things in our space here.
Yeah, I mean, there's 529s that an financial advisor has to get you into, and then there's many that you as a retail person and can go into, and to your point, you can pick different levels of risk or let them do it. And I would say specifically to Florida, Florida doesn't have state income tax, so a big perk of being in your state's financial 529 plan, if the state does this, is you could get a break on your state taxes. The other thing I want to share about fines in general, because people get really learned about the federal government and they say you can do this, you can do this. You have to look at your state, because the states could say, yeah, I know the federal government's going to let you do XYZ, but we don't subscribe to that with our state plan. So that is really, really important. Do not assume that all the perks that the federal government comes out with or the specifics are going to apply to your state. Make sure if you're in your state program, you reach out and are they honoring all of the federal regulations, because they might not allow you to do some of that stuff. So that's a big one.
Yep. 100%. And then last one I can just pick off relatively easy here. Who's eligible for a 529? Basically, if you're a U.S. citizen and you have the ability to save, you can open up a 529, whether it's for your kid, whether it's for yourself, whether it's for your nieces, nephews, parents. If you have the ability to save and are a U.S. citizen, anybody can open up a 529. Maybe there's some exceptions there, but I think that's, generally speaking, that's the answer to the question.
Yep. I agree.
All right, Peggy. Well, congratulations to all of our, especially our class 2026 families, and hold on tight. I know there's still some this close to 5-1, and we still are not sure where we're going. Hang in there, guys. Hang in there. We're gonna end up at the right spot for us.
And all you younger parents, keep listening, keep following, and if you've got a high school child, it's not too soon to start jumping into this, not just sitting on the fringes, just even the UGMA thing we talked about today is a perfect example. Even if you do jump in and then you say, all right, we're in good shape, we can revisit this in 9 months, that's great. But start the process so that you're starting to understand all this stuff for your family.
100%. Thank you, Peggy.
All right.
Bye, guys.
See everybody next time.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap on Old College Try, the podcast. Thanks for joining us. As always, if you get anything out of this, please like us, follow us, share us, write in with your questions. That's what we're here for. We're here to answer any questions when it comes to our crazy world of college, specifically the affordability financial aid piece of the puzzle. Matt Carpenter joined today by our co-host, Peggy Keogh, and today's episode was produced and edited by Eileen Campbell. Thank you.